an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Vorkosigan Saga, Book 2? Barrayar. Chapters 1, 2, and 3. In these chapters, our girl is already preggo. That happened real fast. And, I don't know what to make of this prince. He seems alright. And his mom? There's just a lot of, new potential being thrown out here, and I don't know which direction we're going to pursue. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Vicky for commissioning this episode. Vicky is also here in the chat with me. Lovely to see you. Thank you for being here and for tolerating all of my kitten content that I also feel it is obligatory to include before I start my episode officially. You guys, so when I said book 2 ? Every place that I have gone to find Barrayar has it labeled differently. There was I believe that on the audiobook, on that app, that it was labeled as the 3rd book. And then when I went just now to look for it on Amazon so that I could get the Kindle copy, it was labeled as book 8. And I don't know, I have to assume when it says book 3 that she wound up writing a prequel or something, and that is officially considered book 1, kind of like episode 1 of Star Wars, even though it came later. But 8, I don't know how it gets dropped to 8. So what I'm saying is I just really, really hope I read the right book. Fingers crossed. So let's start. Chapter 1. Cordelia is getting ready for this big meet, but we don't know what it is in this moment. It's not until a little bit later that we actually find out what the situation is. Cordelia herself is wearing a white blouse with a stiff lace collar, a tan jacket, and the long swirling skirts of a Vor-class woman, tan to match the jacket. She has her hair held from her face by 2 enameled combs, flopped over her shoulders to curl loosely halfway down her back. I can't imagine this outfit. What I sort of keep going to is a sort of very late 1800s, sort of the high collar and the fact that it's a jacket paired with a skirt. Those skirts I wouldn't describe as swirling because they tended to be bustled, and so they were actually sort of narrow. But swirling is sort of a subjective descriptor, so I'm not really sure. But yeah, what I keep sort of coming up with is the dresses that a lot of the women in the Gilded Age are wearing, if you have seen that show. That show has some of the most spectacular costuming of any show or movie that I have ever watched. It is really remarkable. So if you're into that sort of thing, I really recommend it. The plot is also great, but the outfits, man, that's really what I'm here for. I'm not going to lie to you. Jeff says, I picture this as a sort of Romanian vibe. I don't really know what Romanian clothing looks like. I'm going to be honest. What I initially start to picture are the outfits from Leigh Bardugo's series, The Six of Crows, but Shadow and Bone, I guess I should say. But I don't think that's the right area. I feel like that's more Czechoslovakian or Russian even. And I'm getting from Jen and Vicky that the author recommends reading in chronological order, that, despite the publication order. So that makes sense. Okay, so I just wanted to point out the clothing here because I just found it really sort of interesting because it does set a real tone for like the overall culture of Barrayar. The vibe that you get here is like you've like stepped back in time to like 1700s Europe, something like that. And it feels as if we have pulled back in terms of the costuming as well. That the way that she dressed on Beta Colony was like modern American. And moving here, she has had to sort of take several steps backward in centuries in order to get clothing that's appropriate. But she is thinking about how she needs to really like figure out her own home at this point, because the navigating all of these hallways and everything, she gets mixed up pretty quickly. I thought this was so funny. Embarrassing to be lost in one's own home and have to ask some passing guard or servant to detangle one in the middle of the night wearing only a towel. I used to be a jump ship navigator. Really? That's so embarrassing. That sucks. So there is our first person that she meets is Lieutenant Kudelka, who is still really struggling with the pain from this injury. I feel so bad for this dude, and I really appreciate her sort of finding a way to reach out to him. I think that it's very well done the way that she approaches it. And also, is anybody surprised that Barrayar is deeply ableist? Nah, this is full on what we would expect. I feel like it really goes with patriarchy, because patriarchy likes to hide behind this sort of men are the stronger of the two sexes, and therefore they deserve to be in charge simply because of physical dominance. And if you're going to follow that thread to the end, then yeah, it's going to mean that anybody who doesn't have the same physical capabilities of other people are going to be looked down on. I say hides behind because I think that's not the real motivation here. It's simply the justifying factor that is cited every time. But, if that's what you are going to just openly claim you value, then it's going to lead to this place. And it doesn't feel that different from America, to be perfectly honest. We try and act like we're more progressive in this sense, but we don't care about disabled people at all. It is really depressing, especially considering that I think a lot of us think of ourselves as, if you are not disabled, oh, I got lucky I didn't get disabled. Other people deal with this, but not me. And then you get older and you become disabled, my friend. If you last long enough, if you live to a certain age, becoming disabled is just the inevitable point you will reach in your life. But we all act as if being disabled is something that you are born with, and you either are at birth or you're not, period. Setting aside injuries that are a result of accidents, just aging, you're going to need help at some point. But nobody cares about it until they need it. That's the point we often live in when it comes to this sort of thing. And I fully admit, ableism and the concepts behind it are something that it took me a while to really get through my head, how not only insidious it is, but pervasive. And once I really did start to clock it, I just have noticed it everywhere. It's a combination of people that are close to me dealing with disabilities, and also being in spaces online where it's discussed frequently, and it's just made me more conscious of all of this. And later on, like, there's a point where she's going upstairs and Cordelia is struggling and he feels shame because he's slowing everybody down. And she's like, do they not have a fucking elevator? Like, what the hell? And apparently they don't do that sort of thing because they just would rather, if you can't keep up, that you just stay home and out of sight. So that sucks. And it's important too that we know this sort of thing before she overhears this conversation that she does, because it sort of contextualizes that while if you heard this outside of the context of what Barrayar's attitude is towards disabled people, you would think that they were really true monsters. But finding out this is Barrayar's general attitude means that they actually are average people, average residents. And not to say that it makes it less terrible, but it influences the way the reader responds to it, I think. We're more willing to sort of like give a little bit of grace when we understand that somebody has been immersed in a culture that tells them a certain thing and they haven't broken out of that yet. I say a little grace because, you know, you got to be careful about it. You can't just be like, well, that's their belief. Like, that's, no. Anyway, I'm going into so much stuff with Cordelia, and we just like are on page 3. This all happens later. So she is asking for Errol, and there's a mention of the fact that she had not, when she got married the like Lord Regent, and now that things are changing, she's like, I know change is an inevitable part of being married to somebody, but this shit is just real different than what we signed up for, man. And I also think it's interesting that she can call him my husband, and that feels correct. But when people call her Lady Vorkosigan, she's always just kind of like, I don't like that. And yeah, you know, that's a whole other thing. They're deleting your own name. It's just your husband's last name and the word lady. If you stop and think about it, lady, it's sort of funny. Like, it just, naming conventions, when you are a woman, the way that we and our entire identity is sidelined is just remarkable. And the government is still set up in such a way that, like, if I changed my name to Winters and Owen changed his name to Winters, because Owen's last name is not Winters, but it's what I go by, we would both have to pay to change our names. And it's a couple $100. But if Owen changes his name to Winters and pays a couple $100, I get to change mine for free, because a woman is so expected to change her name to her husband's that's just covered. And like, Americans don't just cover any expenses ever. So the fact that it's just covered to change your name to your husband's name, that really is like significant. Anyway, I understand her just feeling a bit of a way about this. So Vorkosigan comes up and is like, are you ready to go? And she asks, what's the timetable for the next few days? And he says, first the audience, then I see the men. Count Vortala will be choreographing that. In a few days comes the vote of consent from the full councils assembled and my swearing in. We haven't had a regent in 120 years. God knows what protocol they'll dig out and dust off. And I am genuinely a little bit worried about this. Like, I feel as if there's got to be somebody out there pouring through books, figuring out things they can pull. And I hope that Vorkosigan's got the foresight to put somebody on that on his end as well, so that they can predict things a little bit. So I love when she talks to him and she's just like, is there anything that, like, because she's basically going to be first lady, right? And she's like, do I have tasks that are sort of expected of me, like official, you know? And I love this so much. The social side of your duties can be as much as you wish. Speeches and ceremonies, important weddings and name days and funerals, greeting deputations from the districts, public relations, in short, the sort of thing Princess Dowager Karine does with such flair. Vorkosigan paused, taking in her appalled look, and added hastily, or if you choose, you can live a completely private life. You guys, this point is quickly overtaken by the fact that he says now's the perfect time to do that because she's pregnant. And so this is the first time the reader is realizing that she's pregnant. But I really do want to back up and look at this because what he has described, it's the sort of thing that I have such a combo reaction to. On the one hand, just making small talk and glad handing people sounds excruciatingly tedious. On the other hand, you guys know I'm a performer, and to just go to events and make a speech or introduce someone, I feel like that might be fun. Also having reasons to dress up constantly or always shopping for new outfits, that's fun. But obviously that's just not who she is, really. So yeah, I don't see this in her future. I think anytime that she does something like this, it's going to be essentially something mandatory somehow. And he says, on the political side, I'd like it very much if you could be my liaison with the Princess Dowager and the child emperor. Make friends if you can. She's extremely reserved, and the boy's upbringing is vital. We must not repeat Azar Varbara's mistakes. And I think that they can safely discount that possibility based on what we see later, but I don't know. Maybe there's somebody else in his life influencing him that isn't just his mother. So let's see. He says, and there's another angle. When the late Crown Prince Serge called Count Vortala a phony progressive, it wasn't altogether nonsense. Insults that sting always have some truth in them. Count Vortala has been trying to form his progressive party in the upper classes only, among the people who matter, as he would say. You see the little discontinuity in his thinking. About the size of Hogarth's Canyon back home? Yes. And he says, you're a Baton, a woman of galactic-wide reputation. And she's like, come on. And he says, you really don't get it. Everybody knows who you are. And you're seen a certain way. And she's like, yeah, it's a good way because, I'm part of the group that just annihilated y'all in a war. Not annihilate, but you know what I'm saying? And I would think that would make them think I was sort of a piece of shit. And he's like, the thing is, we're very warlike. And if you are a badass soldier, they'll pretty much just always be impressed with you, no matter what side you're on. And so you kind of bring things together. You're military, but you're not an aristocrat, and you're also not from Barrayar. So there's a lot of angles that you could pull together and help me out if you were to do that. And she says, how long have you been thinking about this? And he says, the problem, a long time, but you as part of the solution just today. Which genuinely, combination surprise, and also I'm I'm not sure I believe you. Maybe. But I don't think he'd lie to her. But, really? Just now? He says, what I want is to find some way of pulling the best men from every class and language group and party into the Emperor's service. The Vor have simply too small a pool of talent. Make the government more like the military at its best, with ability promoted regardless of background. Emperor Azar tried to do something like that by strengthening the ministries at the expense of the counts, but it swung too far. The counts are eviscerated and the ministries are corrupt. There must be some way to strike a balance. And this is also just... so far, I think I have made a couple references to Dandelion Dynasty while covering these books, but I'm going to point it out again. There is a character at the very start of the series who is doing very much what he is describing here, attempting to get the best minds in place regardless of their background. And he himself is from a humbler background, and he is his particular talent is spotting talent, which is actually crucial to the position that he's in. And so he winds up with this like extremely strong cabinet council. I don't really know even how to word that, but because he is so great about promoting people that others would overlook, he just winds up with this unusually capable group of people backing him. And it helps assure him getting through a lot of things that might have shattered another leader. So, yeah, looking forward to all of this. So, Ilian, by the way, is like, I really think you need to live at the Imperial residence. Like, there's going to be security issues, and those are my issues. It'll be a lot easier to control them here. And Vorkosigan says, what suite did you have in mind? Well, when Gregor succeeds, he and his mother will be moving into the Emperor's suite, and Kareen's rooms will be vacant. Prince Serge's, you mean? Vorkosigan looked grim. I think I would prefer to take official residence at Vorkosigan House. My father spends more and more time in the country at Vorkosigan-sur-Lot these days. I don't think he'll mind being shifted. I can't really endorse that idea, sir, strictly from a security standpoint. It's in the old part of town. The streets are warrens. There are at least 3 sets of old tunnels under the area from old sewage and transport systems, and there are too many new tall buildings overlooking that have commanding views. It will take at least 6 full-time patrols for the most cursory protection. Do you have the men? Well, yes. Vorkosigan House, then. It may be bad security, but it's very good public relations. It will give an excellent air of soldierly humility to the new regency. Should help reduce palace coup paranoia. I don't know why I didn't think of the fact that people were going to be worried about this, because I think it's just I've gotten to know Vorkosigan fairly well, and I just know how that is so not what he would want, that just the thought is laughable, honestly. And so, like, I've been sort of assuming everybody knows him well enough to see, of course not, you know, but I don't think, I think there are some people out there who truly cannot fathom being in a position that, like, he will be in, where the potential is there to just seize control and not taking that opportunity. You know, when your mind works that way, it just, you assume everybody else's mind also works that way. And so the fact that he doesn't want to be emperor, just period, permanently, they are just straight up never going to believe him. And so, yeah, he's like going to have to do what he can to sort of ensure everybody knows that is so not what he is after. So they go inside, and it says, Vorkosigan and Negri exchanged curt greetings in the telegraphic style of 2 men who had been communicating for so long. All of the amenities had been compressed into some kind of tight burst code. I love that sentence so much. All of the amenities had been compressed. That is such a great way to say that. Like, you could say anything extraneous had been got rid of, like it was stripped down. But no, it's not gone. It's just condensed in such a way that you get it across even faster than you would any other way, because the body language is so readable and you're already always on the same page. I felt like that was just so eloquently described, and in a way with a dimension that I wouldn't have thought to put it myself. So, Drusnakovi, who is introduced here, she is the bodyguard of the princess, although she's not, like, technically part of the military here. she says, Princess Corrine, my official title is Servant of the Inner Chamber. I'm listed on Captain Negri's staff budget as Bodyguard Class 1. It was hard to tell which title gave her the more pride and pleasure, but Cordelia suspected it was the latter, which we find out later. Likely, yes. So they go inside this room, and Corrine is there, a strained-looking woman of 30 with elaborately dressed, beautiful dark hair, though her gray gown was of a simple cut. Simple, but perfect. A dark-haired boy of 4 or so was sprawled on the floor on his stomach, muttering to his cat-sized stegosaurus, which muttered back. She made him get up and turn off the robot toy and sit beside her, though his hands still clutched the leathery stuffed beast in his lap. Cordelia was relieved to see the boy prince was sensibly dressed for his age in comfortable-looking play clothes. I really like this detail, and it's the sort of thing that I really automatically did picture him in a sort of like Little Lord Fauntleroy sort of outfit, honestly, like something that was a little too frilly and too fancy. And now I'm picturing him in just sort of like, shorts and a t-shirt and socks. Because this really gives you the idea of the kind of mother she is, and the fact that she is treating him as if he were a child and not as if he were like a miniature adult expected to behave a certain way. I don't know if I were raising a child that I knew were royalty and that had to behave in a certain fashion when they got older. I don't know when I would begin to try and instill that kind of awareness in my kid, but it's got to be such a tricky thing to navigate, and like allowing them to be a regular kid as much as possible, I'm certain would be a priority, but how do you do that, I love when Vorkosigan like introduces himself. The kid sort of shrinks away, and Vorkosigan realizes that he can be very intense, and maybe he just needs to dial it back a little bit. He explains what his job is, and he says, your job for now is to study hard with your tutors and do what your mother tells you. Can you do that? I think you can do well. While you're here, sir, Negri began after a short wait to be certain he wasn't stepping on some further word, I wish you would come down to Ops. There are 2 or 3 reports I'd like to present. The latest from Darkoi seems to indicate Count Vorlakale was dead before his residence was burned. And I was like, oh, what's going on there? And then he says, and then the problem of revamping the Ministry of Political Education, to which Vorkosigan responds, dismantling, surely. And he says, as may be. So I was sort of like thinking, when he first mentions the Ministry of Political Education, I was like, Vorkosigan, you can't keep that going. So when he says dismantling, I'm relieved. But then I'm thinking, they're going to push back against that. And then the guy saying, as it may be, doesn't seem to have any particular body language that suggests he thinks that's a bad idea. It rolls with that immediately. So I'm wondering if this is representative of the general feelings towards the ministry, or if he is just being diplomatic in the moment, being in front of the guy who wants it dismantled, or if this is just his individual opinion and there are a lot of other people who really think it's a mistake. I don't know. And then he mentions a sabotage from Komar, and we don't get any further details on that. Vorkosigan, leaves with him to begin looking through all of this stuff that's happening, and Cordelia is left to speak with princess, the queen. I can't remember exactly how. The empress, she's not though. Princess Dowager, that's how they call her. Right. So there's a little bit of conversation about Kudelka and where his injuries came from. Initially, Cordelia is very defensive of him because she thinks that they have a tone when they ask what's wrong with him, but they seem to not really feel the way she is worried they may feel. And the way that Corrine reacts, she immediately asks Drushnikovi, who Corrine just calls Drew, to take the prince to his lunch. And it's clear that it's just, I need to be alone with her for a moment. And Princess Corrine takes Cordelia's hand as soon as her son and Drew are out of the room, and she kisses it and says, I swore that I would kiss the hand that slew Jess Verrucci. And Cordelia admits it wasn't her. This lady at first thinks, oh, then it really was Vorkosigan, and Cordelia's like, no, it was his man. And the way that she responds, she says, Bothari the monster, Bothari Verrucci's mad Batman. I know that Batman doesn't mean in this case what it means now, but it's just very difficult to not keep a straight face when she calls him mad Batman. Oh, God. But yeah, the overall result here, I really wasn't expecting it to go this way. But Cordelia explains to her that Bothari, basically tried to make up for the way he had been participating in this thing with Verrucci. And when she says, do you blame Admiral Verrucci for Prince Serge's corruption? She just asks that. I was so startled that she just asked. I didn't think this was getting brought up. And she straight up mentions to herself, nobody talks about the prince. Why does nobody mention Prince Serge? And then later she's like, I'm not going to mention him again because this conversation gets a little tough for a moment. Corrine says that Verrucci found a like-minded friend in Serge, a fertile follower. Maybe not all Verrucci's fault. I don't know. And then Azar protected me from Serge after I became pregnant. I had not even seen my husband for over a year when he was killed at Escobar. Again, I just like Azar. I just like him. I appreciate this man's practicality and willingness to look at hard facts. Thank you. I'm sure he's done hateful shit, but I can't count killing his own son among it. I just can't. The dude sounded like a fucking monster. Anyway. And the way that this sort of wraps up is it becomes more formal again. Once tea is brought in, this kind of heart-to-heart that happens between the two of them is quickly ended. And Cordelia just talks about what living here is like. The princess is like, do you still see us as the enemy? And she's like, oh, I haven't seen you guys as the enemy for a minute, long before the war even ended. And they talk about the fact that Errol is going to use an aptitude test to determine who is going to get the jobs. And she doesn't seem to have a problem with that at all. It's just a lot of the reactions that people are having to what Vorkosigan is sort of presenting as his platform, I guess, their responses are less, what's the word I want? Resistant. I kind of expected him to seem way too progressive to most people. But I don't know if it's that folks aren't as conservative in certain ways as I expected, or if they just were aware who Vorkosigan was and are unsurprised by what he would prioritize. I don't know, but I'm interested to see going forward, how people react to a lot of his suggestions. So chapter 2, oh, I forgot about this. There is a delivery later on in the night. She clutched a large valise and gazed around with starry-eyed interest. Captain Negri is assigning Miss Drusnakovi to the regent consort for her personal security. Later, Drusnakovi handed Cordelia a sealed note on thick cream paper. Brows rising, Cordelia broke it open. The handwriting was small and neat, the signature legible and without flourishes. With my compliments, she will suit you well, Corrine. And we do find out Indeed, she does. I'm going to kind of call her Drew, I think, because it is just quicker. But we find out later that she's actually not technically a real guard. And it's so funny because, like, eventually we find out that she gets tapped to guard the princess because it's hard to find women guards, and she had requested specifically a woman guard. So they have, like, obviously got a sort of issue with the types of soldiers they're making. There's a shortage of women, and they know that, but they also are actively discouraging any women from becoming soldiers. And genuinely, that kind of disconnect is just so real. You would think, well, obviously this thing is happening, and that means we don't have enough, so let's make more. And people just, that sort of like one-to-one thinking is way rarer than I had thought when I was younger. As I get older, I'm just like, yeah, of course it doesn't make any sense. That's just how we are. So eventually, it's funny, Cordelia is like, I'm going to go shopping, so can you come with me? And this girl, of course, thinks she means for clothes and is sort of disappointed and isn't great at hiding the fact, because she's excited to be working for somebody who was herself a soldier, an official woman captain, This is like dope for her. So to be then brought looking for dresses, she's just kind of, oh. But then Cordelia's like, where would you go to buy a really good sword stick? And she's like, oh, I know the exact place, and gets very excited. On the way in, she mentions the fact that she has never been inside the store because her family isn't Vor, so they're not permitted to own personal weapons. And this lodged in my mind, guys, because this is for Kudelka. And I immediately was like, oh, wait, well, if you're getting this for who I think you're getting, then he can't have it. But thankfully, Cordelia doesn't get that. She doesn't like stop and really connect those dots, which results in her going ahead and just doing it. And then Vorkosigan on the spot making a special allowance for it. And I don't know if she had realized what this really meant in the moment. Maybe she would have been like, oh, are those the rules? Never mind. And she wouldn't have tried to push the issue. I'd like to think that we'd end up with the same result ultimately, because she would mention what she had intended to Vorkosigan, and he would say, oh, you know what we can do. And so we'd get here in the end anyway. But I just thought it was funny that later on, Kudelka has to be like, I guess you didn't know. And he tells her the thing that she did know. She was told explicitly before going shopping, and she just didn't really, use her critical thinking there. But then we have this whole thing in this shop, which the clerk is like really patronizing when they come in a way that's just, it rankles her. And she asks to see a sword stick, and he brings something out that's like obviously much more decorative than practical, and doesn't think they will know the difference. And I love that she asks Drew to like give her opinion. And it's clear that Drew is very worried about insulting this clerk. And Cordelia has to remind her, like, you're working for me, not for him, so tell me the truth. And she says, I don't think it's a good blade. And this dude is just like, it's excellent workmanship. And she's like, all right, well, let's see. And she shoves the tip of the blade into the wall and presses, and it just snaps. And this man has the audacity to tell her that she better pay for that damaged merchandise. She doesn't like argue with him exactly right. Like, she's just like, send the bill to Vorkosigan house. And then, while you're about it, you can explain why you tried to pass off sleaze on his wife, yeoman. This last was a guess based on his age and walk, but you could tell from his eyes she'd struck home. Now, yeoman is like a person who has fewer rights than the Lord, right? So I'm assuming she's basically saying like, you're not fucking at our level, and is equivalent of being like peasant. I'm not mad at it though, because he was being really like shitty on the basis of them just being women. So I will have to put my gender solidarity ahead of my class solidarity in this moment. Probably a little short-sighted of me, but we all have our fucking, instincts, and that's mine. So he gives her another one, and she's about to test it, and I love this. She asks, like, do these come out of your salary? I love that. This reminded me of the remake of Roadhouse that has Jake Gyllenhaal in it, which is really fun, by the way. I like highly recommend it. It was such a good time. But there's a point where he's about to beat the shit out of some guys, and he's like, do you guys have insurance? Like, good coverage? And he's dead ass serious and sincere in asking this question. And this just really reminded me of that. And this dude is like, go ahead and do it. Even if it did, I'm confident. And so she leans a lot on this blade, and it doesn't come anywhere close to feeling like it's going to snap, and takes like more weight. And she realizes that even if she pressed harder, it could continue to bend. Like, it's really well built. And she says she'll take it. She asks Drew, do you want anything? And she's just like, no, Captain Negri has the best equipment. Even this place, nothing is better. It's just prettier. And I was like, well, then get prettier then, girl. Do it. But I can understand not wanting to do that, because if you're fighting to be taken seriously as a woman in the first place, you don't want to be carrying around cute equipment, because then people are going to think things about it. Ugh. Being a woman is so tedious, you guys. Like, there are a few perks, but they are real, like, they're not at a level that adequately compensates, It just, I don't know. I personally, if I were going to like come back, I don't think I would check the box next to woman, because it's just a real bummer. So anyway, she gives this gift, and I love Kudelka is like first thinking she's just giving him a cane. And so he has to be nice, but it's clear like he's a little humiliated. But then when she says, like, press this, he does. And reminder that, like, the first one, when she pressed the button, it just sort of popped out a little bit. This one, when you press the button to get the sword out, it shoots the, like, wooden part of the stick and makes it almost a projectile. And so this almost goes through the window. But when he realizes what it is, he gets so excited. His whole face lights up. And then he's like, but I'm not allowed to have this. And this is when Vorkosigan is like, I own this blade, and I am issuing it to you for service for the Emperor. And Cordelia just shakes her head and is like, I don't think I'm ever going to understand this place. And I was like, really? Like, you have rules, and then you just find loopholes. That's not, I feel like that's very obvious what's happening here, but maybe that's just how my twisty brain works. So I love too, when she's in the next room talking to Vorkosigan, they keep hearing that thwack, because he keeps doing the thing where he's like pressing the button over and over again, and it happens like 4 or 5 times. And that was so cute. I loved that so much. I think Kudelka is really like winning me over a lot. I liked him right away anyway, but like the more time we spend with him, the more precious he seems. Ooh, I'm sorry, Jeff. I didn't even see all this in the chat. He says, interesting that a right-wing society bans personal weapons. Is it? I kind of feel like if we were in a right-wing enough society, certain people, asterisk, you know who, would also be forbidden to have personal weapons. I'm just saying. It may also be that she thinks he was a yeoman in the service, sort of a servant to a captain. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of that. Batons are pretty blunt and straightforward, but surely they have lawyers, right? This is what I'm thinking, like, especially considering the way that she was dealt with these, like, gaslighters. They may be blunt and straightforward in comparison to the Barrayarns, like, in terms of immediate communication, but their brains seem pretty twisty themselves. I don't know. But yeah, this is when they have the conversation about how people who are disabled are treated. And he says that the social stigma is very great. Watch him in a larger group sometimes, not his close friends. It's no accident that the suicide rate among medically discharged soldiers is high. And yeah, that is such a fucking bummer. And I appreciated him being like, watch him among large, because that is the realest thing. If you are from any community that is marginalized, when you're around your own people, your entire personality is going to be different than it is around the people that are not your people. And it can be kind of a shock when you are part of the circle that they feel safe in, to see them outside of it and realize how much they have to code switch. And I mean that, like, normally that's used to describe the difference between the way a black person behaves around other black people versus white. But I'm talking about code switching in, like, the larger sense of people from any group being able to use certain language or display certain, like, behaviors and characteristics. And it can be very sobering to remember, like, I get to see them when they're comfortable, but when they're navigating the regular world, they have to lock down so much of their personality, so much of themselves gets put away. It can just be really, like, a saddening reminder, but something very necessary to understand what people have to cope with every day. And I don't know, this just got to me a little bit, that mention, you know? So, you know, and when she says, like, well, Bothari, though, he's also fucked up, and Vorkosigan's like, yeah, but he's usable for things, you know, there's still something to be got out of him. And, she says, I keep thinking I'm beginning to adjust to this place. Then I go around another corner and run headlong into something like that. And this made me laugh a little because, like, Cordelia's Beta Colony, I have been sort of treating as if it's like the United States, and that Barrayar is like what the Americans' equivalent would be, I would say, is like Afghanistan. When I say that, I mean Afghanistan gets often held up by racists as like the big boogeyman, like Sharia law. You know what I'm talking about? Even though when you get down to it, a lot of right-wing thinking is really similar, but we don't like to talk about that. But yeah, that was this is how I keep thinking about it. And so when I think about her being like America and her reaction to all of this, I have to sort of turn it around, because like the viewpoint he is describing here is American, right? Like, we want to pretend it's not, but it is. We have a lot more in common with Barrayar than we seem to have with Beta Colony when it gets right down to it. Our government may be built differently, but its goals are the same. That's what it feels like to me. So anyway, yeah, he says, it's only been 80 years since Barrayar made contact with a wider galactic civilization again. What? Did we know this? I didn't remember any of this. It wasn't just technology we lost in the time of isolation that we put back on again quickly like a borrowed coat. Underneath it, we're still pretty damn naked in places. So this makes sense why the medical tech is so far behind. But I didn't know that they were like completely isolated from things. Did we ever get told this? Did I just forget? Forgive me if that's the case, you guys, but that is like, I just totally forgot it if it was mentioned. So anyway, Pyotr, he says something about like voting for his son, and he says he's lucky to get my vote. He's picked up some damn peculiar radical notions in the last few years. If he wasn't my son, he could whistle for it. But Pyotr's seamed face looked proud. And I like to think that he really likes the fact that his son is pushing the envelope a little bit here. He's got balls, you know? He's like making his own rules. And he says that Volkosigan doesn't see himself that way. He thinks he can go halfway and then stop. I think he'll find himself riding a tiger a few years down the road. I love that, and I think that he is exactly correct. And we find out that the old count, as she calls him in her mind, this dude was like willing to deal with Errol marrying her, but he wasn't thrilled about it until she tells him that she's pregnant. And now this bitch is absolutely like, she has been promoted to a certain goddess-like level in his eyes, and he is fascinated with the pregnancy. He had really thought his lineage was ending with Vorkosigan, and she has come into his life and upended that entirely, already pregnant, and she gives birth within these first couple chapters, I think, right? Does she? Am I remembering that right? She does, right? I can't believe that I've lost track so completely. But like, I just thought this was going to take a lot longer. And I just am, it's sort of frustrating because I love the fact that he is so devoted, because that's just helpful and useful, you know? But also, the reason for it is just kind of icky. Anytime that women are only being treated well and revered because they can have babies, it does rub me the wrong way. You know, I can't help it. Vicky says she has not given birth. I think I may just be like remembering the canister being opened and her holding that baby. And now I'm realizing like I conflated those things. That is wild. I don't know how I got that all mixed up. Sorry about it, guys. I promise I reread these chapters. I read this section twice, so I don't know how I'm getting all mixed up here. But anyway, this little like attitude of his, just hope we can make the most of it for a little while. We have a bit here of Cordelia and Arl just sort of like joking around, wrestling and tickling each other, and I just loved this. Like, I need this sort of thing in a romance. I need these moments of people getting to just be people with each other and it not always being sort of life or death situations. And then they get to just automatically be in love in between in a way that feels like the only thing that has brought them together is this shared trauma or whatever. I like seeing the playfulness between people who really care about each other, because for me, that's like the whole thing. If you can't have this sort of energy with your partner, find a new partner. That's my attitude about it. This is me and Owen all day. We are just fucking annoying each other and poking at each other and giggling. Like, that's just our whole personality with each other. And I really appreciate that not only do we get this between the two of them, but it actually feels natural. Some writers, they try and do like this kind of couples banter and they just make everybody too clever and they make the conversation too like layered, or they can't resist turning the conversation into something a lot more serious that has to do with like the plot. But these two get to just sort of joke around without it being turning into anything more, you know, until a little bit later after that moment is sort of over, you know. But yeah, I really appreciate the two of them as a relationship and how much this author restrains herself from making it like the main event while also having it be like a really important foundational element. It's obviously like a main part of the story, but it doesn't feel like everything just revolves around the two of them and being in love. Like, that is a thing that's also happening along with a lot of other important things. So I'm just, I really have a hard time with romances a lot because I don't feel like the couples seem to have any actual chemistry, or the romance is being used for the excuse to give characters really foolish choices. And that's not what it feels like here. If anything, it's like they're grounding each other and helping them make like better choices. So I'm sorry. I am like really behind here, you guys. I'm so sorry. But, we have the two of them. Piotr, draws her into the dining room. After the Count's supper, walking arm in arm with him into the foyer, Cordelia's ear was caught by the sound of raised voices coming from the library. The words were muffled, but the tones were sharp, chop-cadenced. Cordelia paused, disturbed. And this guy comes out, and Errol and Vortala she can see them, but this dude is coming out. Errol's face was set, his eyes burning. Vortala, an age-shrunken man with a balding liver-spotted head fringed with white, was brick pink to the top of his naked scalp. Naked scalp. That's brutal. With a curt gesture, the man collected his waiting liveried retainer, who followed smartly, blank-faced. And he comes across the Count and just says his name. The dude replies, Barrayarn. Mark my words, you and I, every other man of worth on Barrayar, will live to regret tomorrow. Piotr pursed his lips. My son will not betray his class, Barrayarn. You blind yourself. And he gives, Cordelia a look and walks away. He will betray his class. I don't know if he's blinding himself or if he's just saying what he needs this guy to hear and knows perfectly well that he's right. I can't decide. But I hope he betrays his class. I know that I chose gender over class solidarity, but I'm a woman. What do you got with gender? No, make it class solidarity, dude. Do it. Let's see it. So his name was mentioned frequently in speculation about the upcoming regency. I rather fear he may have been counting on it for himself. He's made great efforts to cultivate Kareen. He should have been cultivating Azar. Maybe he'll come down out of the air overnight. Try him in the morning a little more humbly this time, Vortala. Coddling Vordarion's ego could be a full-time task. He spends too much damn time studying his family tree. Errol grimaced agreement. He's not the only one. He is to hear him tell it, growled Vortala. So, let's go to chapter 3 here. This is so funny. So, we're at the vote. She's sitting in the audience watching this whole thing. We get some descriptions of Lord Padmazav Vorpatril. I think I'm saying that right. Vorpatril, maybe? He turned out to be not only a member of her husband's new staff, but also his first cousin, son of Errol's long-dead mother's younger sister. Lord Vorpatril was the first close relative of Errol's Cordelia had encountered besides Count Piotr. Piotr? I don't know if I'm saying that right. It wasn't that Errol's relatives were avoiding her, as she might have feared. He had a real dearth of them. He and Vorpatril were the only surviving children of the previous generation, of whom Count Piotr was himself the last living representative. So I appreciated that being mentioned, because I was sort of like, she hasn't met this person, like they're married and she hasn't even gone to see his family, and yeah, I guess not, probably. So everybody is dressed and somber. The emperor himself had a ghostly presence over closed circuit comlink, which was so odd. Azar was shown in the holovid seated in full uniform. At what physical cost, Cordelia could not guess. I was just like, yo, guys, do we need to be doing this? I guess. So there's a conversation here with, I'm going to say Vorpatro. That's how I'm going to keep saying it. I got to pick one and I keep going back and forth. She asks if Errol's appointment was a surprise, and he's like, not really. And he says, like, a lot of people, when he resigned, didn't take it seriously, although I did. And she's like, well, he meant it seriously. And he's like, yeah, I definitely think he meant it that way. But, he's just, he lean on his duty, on what is required of him. And that's always the way to get him. And he says by the time we served together, he was getting strange. If you could get him going, how did you get him going? I thought political discussion was forbidden to officers. I suppose they could forbid breathing with about as much chance of success. The dictum is, shall we say, sporadically enforced. Errol stuck to it unless Rolf Vorhalis and I took him out and got him really relaxed. Errol's drinking was notable. I thought he was a terrible drinker, no stomach for it. Oh, that was what was notable. He seldom drank. Although he went through a bad period after his first wife died, when he used to run around with Jace Vorutcher a lot. Yo, how did I forget about the potential relationship between him and Barrayar? I am so curious about it, you guys. I really want to know. It would be a shame if Barrayar were like, if it were sort of being presented as if it were a relationship and it turns out not to be. I'm hoping it actually was, because if it weren't, and the presumption is that Vorkosigan's actually straight, then we've got like one of the only queer characters also being a horrible sadist, which I don't want. So, I'm just fingers crossed on that. But yeah, he says it was dangerous to get him too relaxed because then he'd go all depressed and serious. And then it didn't take a thing to get him onto whatever injustice or incompetence or insanity was rousing his ire. God, the man could talk. By the time he'd had his fifth drink, just before he slid under the table for the night, he'd be claiming revolution in iambic pentameter. I always thought he'd end up on the political side someday. This is so delightful an image. It's giving Miles Schneiderman. Miles, if you're listening to this, Miles doesn't have to be drunk, but you guys, like, we just can't not do this, And I imagine this is exactly how he is in like a situation with family that he wouldn't normally just bust out the political convo. He'll do it with me on a podcast. But I'm sure around certain folks, he just sort of like has to keep a lid on it. And I bet it would get like this real quick. Oh, God. Anyway, I just love that. So she, there's a moment where they make their votes. And Cordelia is like, oh, even Count Verdarian voted yay. That's surprising. And Vorpatro says, yes, Emperor Azar made it clear he wanted united approval. And she's like, wait, so they don't really want to be voting? Yes. And he's like, not if they want things to work out for them. And she says, oh, then the men who abstain must have some courage of conscience. Oh, they're all right. What do you mean? They're the opposition, surely. Yes, but they're open opposition. No one plotting serious treason would mark himself so publicly. The fellows Errol will need to guard his back from are in the other mob, amongst the yes men. And I was like, yeah, girl, come on. You got to know this. I understand, though. The author needs to explain it to us, the reader. But I feel like, Cordelia, come on. You gotta see how that would work. And when she asks who he's thinking, Verpatro says Negri, probably. So that's interesting. Don't love that. Somebody who's in charge of fucking... Yeah, nah, that's not a good place for things to be. So, this is when these two boys sit down in front of her. I say boys, they're grown men, but they're young. And they sit down in front of her, and they start talking about Vorkosigan, not knowing that she's seated directly behind him and that that's her husband and she's Lady Vorkosigan. And this is also very embarrassing. And they talk about him so openly for her to hear. What's the word on him in the service? Depends who you ask. Sardi thinks he's a strategic genius and dotes on his communiques. He's been all over the place. Every brush fire in the past 25 years seems to have his name on it somewhere. Uncle Rolf used to think the world of him. On the other hand, Niels, who was at Escobar, said he was the most cold-blooded bastard he ever met. I hear he has a reputation as a secret progressive. There's nothing secret about it. Some of the senior Vor officers are scared to death of him. He's been trying to get father with him in Vortala on that new tax ruling. Yawn. It's the direct imperial tax on inheritances. Ouch! Well, that wouldn't hit him, would it? The Vorkosigans are so damn poor. Let Komar pay. That's why we conquered it, isn't it? Not exactly, my fraternal ignoramus. Have any of you town clowns met his Baton Frill yet? He calls her a frill. I have never heard frill. Like, I kind of like it because it's, first of all, it doesn't feel super gendered. Like, you could do that with a dude and it would still work, you know? And he says there are the damnedest rumors circulating about her, Vorkosigan, and Barrayar at Escobar, most of which contradict each other. She keeps a low profile for somebody who's supposed to be 3 meters tall and eat battle cruisers for breakfast. Scarcely anyone's seen her. Maybe she's ugly. They'll make a pair then. Vorkosigan's no beauty either. Cordelia, vastly amused, hid a grin behind her hand until the commander said, I don't know who that 3-legged spastic is he has trailing him, though. Staff, you suppose? I love that we're specifically told. Cordelia, them being like, maybe she's ugly and he's ugly too, does not, like, fucking affect her. Just totally unbothered, genuinely thinking this is funny. The second that they start to talk shit about, oh my God. I keep wanting to say Drusnikovi, but that's the woman. I had his name all episode, you guys. I was doing so well. Oh my God. Y'all know who I'm talking about. Kudelka. Thank you, Vicky. The second that they start to go in on him and in the tone and language that they're using here, she is absolutely like, no, we're not fucking doing that. And I just love this about her so much. Like, it's just great that the author made sure to let us know. She draws the line here. Her own pride and a vanity, not a problem. What does she care? But when they're using this word, and for those who don't know, spastic is a word that in America, what we usually mean is erratic. Like, when you say like something is moving spastically, it is meant to convey that it's sort of unpredictable all over the place. And so I think it's clear when you look at the word and the fact that in Britain, and I think maybe in a lot of other countries, but Britain's the one I know I've heard about for sure, it is basically like the R word. It makes sense that our use of it would mean erratic because that is what they're sort of thinking is like the movements of people who are disabled. So like our use of it, the root of where that is coming from isn't great. But it doesn't have the same like overt meaning here as it does in Britain. So that word I have used before years ago on a podcast, and somebody got in touch and was like, hey, that's not cool. And I was like, it's not? I didn't get what they were talking about. And then I like looked into it and I was like, oh. And since then, I really try not to use it, even though I think of it as the word for erratic and use, like, I have to consciously switch over to remember. And so anybody who's listening, who isn't aware of that, like, this kind of thing it's a really gross slur like word to be using, and makes sense that she would get her back up about this quite a lot. And I love the way that he says, you'd think he could do better than that. What a mutant. A fucking, like, Jesus Christ. So she leans forward and says, Commander, and you, whoever you are, for your information, the gentleman in question is Lieutenant Kudelka, and there are no better officers. Not in anybody's service. And they don't know who she is. I really wish she had led with that. I really, really wish she had. I get she is just not the type to really throw her weight around in that manner. But I can't help but think her interruption here would have a lot more weight if they knew who she was from the start. However, they basically are like, who the fuck asked you? And she admits, like, yes, I was eavesdropping and that was shitty. But what you said was fucking shitty. And she says it was a disgrace to the uniform you both wear. And Vorpatro says, here, but the commander turns around and says, oh, Captain, we haven't met, madam, and is just essentially going like, do you have a leash for her or what? Like, is she's with you and you're just letting her talk to us like this? What the fuck? So, when he says we have not met, Cordelia says, no, but I don't go around flipping over rocks to see what's living underneath. She just fucking like, wow, that was brutal. And she immediately is like, oh, God. I did it too. I went too far. Oh, dear. I mean, yeah, you did. You did. But, God, it was beautiful to see. It was like a really pretty explosion. Like, yeah, he definitely destroyed something, but that was cool for a second. Oh, God. So Vorpatro's like, you don't know who, and Cordelia cuts him off and is like, don't introduce us. We'll only embarrass each other further. And she backs off from the whole thing. Apologizes. The young lord just is like, yeah, goddamn right. But the older brother says, we accept. I presume the lieutenant is some relative of yours. I apologize for whatever insult you felt was implied. And she's like, he's not a relation, but only my second dearest enemy, which is a real weird way to say this. I would ask a favor of you. Don't let a comment like that fall in Admiral Vorkosigan's hearing. He loves him as a son. And one of them says, are you implying I'd find myself doing guard duty on Kyril Island? And she's just like, I don't know what that means. I doubt it. But it would hurt him to hear. He's not going to, like, punish you, but it would bum him out. And he just can't compute that. Like, oh, I'm going to hurt his feelings? Like, really? He's just like, what are you talking about? So, eventually, they get introduced. This is so great, you guys. There are the boys. I promised them an introduction. Evan is itching for a place on the staff, but I told him he'd have to earn it. I wish Carl had as much interest in the service. Oh, God, thought Cordelia. It would have to be them. The two men who had sat before her in the gallery were presented to her. They both blanched and bowed nervously over her hand. But you've met, said Vorkosigan. I saw you talking in the gallery. Oh, God. I just thought she could pretend. It was nothing. But he saw them talking, so now it's like a whole thing. She tells him geology, which is such a good joke, you guys. Zoology. Oh my God, that is so funny. Oh, And then courtesy, much on courtesy, we had quite a wide-ranging discussion. We each of us taught the other something, I think. She smiled and did not flick an eyelid. Commander Evan Warhalis, looking rather ill, said, "Yes, I've had a lesson I'll never forget, milady." Oh, God, she handles this so well. I absolutely cannot. Just the beauty of, it's just so good, you guys. It's so good. I loved it so much. This cracked me up. Anyway, then we have this moment. Kudelka, loaded with plastic flimsies, discs, the baton of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces that had just been presented to Vorkosigan as regent-elect in his own stick, and uncertain whether to shake hands or salute, managed to drop them all and do neither. There was a general scramble to retrieve the load, and Kudelka went red, bending awkwardly after it. Drushnikovi and he put a hand on the stick at the same time. "I don't need your help, miss," Kudelka snarled at her in a low voice, and she recoiled to go stand rigidly behind Cordelia. I was so bummed out by this, because, it makes sense. Getting help by a woman who is at this point physically stronger than you are, and doing what you wish you were doing, a real fucking bummer to see him react this way, but it makes sense. I just want him to, be better than this, you know? So, anyway, the Barrayarn Emperor slipped into his final coma a week later, but lingered on another week beyond that. And I'm unclear exactly how long this is since we had Errol being placed as regent and accepting. I feel like it seems about 3 weeks, but I may be wrong about this. Vortala, Count Pyotr, and themselves, the princess and Prince Gregor, several ministers, and some men from the general staff kept a quiet, standing death watch for almost an hour before the still, decayed figure on the bed took on, almost imperceptibly, an added stillness. I've never been in the room when someone's died. I was in the room when a couple of the puppies died, but that's not quite the same thing. But yeah, this is just sort of there's a grimness to all of this, and she has to give her oath to Barrayar, and really, it has a profound effect on her that she is in a way that feels very profound to her, turning her back on her home and really embracing where she lives and who she's with now. And it's not really regret exactly. It's just a major shift that she kind of has to cope with. She sees that the only person who weeps is Captain Negri, and he gathers himself quite quickly, but he is absolutely blank most of the time. So showing this kind of emotion, clearly they were very close, and I don't know that was necessary. I'm not trying to say it's romantic or anything, but there's something really sweet about that and sad, you know. So after the spate of ceremonies had died down, Cordelia began at last to establish. I'm so far over time. I just realized, you guys, I keep doing this. Oh my God. And I'm I still have a few pages left in this chapter and I'm over. Anyway, Cordelia it says his long hours were a startup cost, Cordelia told herself. He would settle in, become more efficient when everything wasn't all for the first time. I don't believe you. I was just straight up saying, this is the sort of thing that I think a lot of people tell themselves when somebody takes on a really intense, stressful job. They tell themselves it's only for the beginning. And this sort of job, I just imagine you just never slow down, that it's never not a fucking crisis somewhere, you know? That's why presidents age 15 years in 4. So besides, she had a job, gestating, It was a task of no little status, judging from the cosseting she received from everyone, from Count Pyotr down to the kitchen maid who brought her nutritious little snacks at odd hours. She hadn't received this much approval even when she'd returned from a year-long survey mission with a zero-accident record. Reproduction seemed far more enthusiastically encouraged here than on Beta Colony. I really wonder what would happen if she gave birth to a girl. I feel like we've heard that it's a boy, but I can't remember. But I hope that it wouldn't be a whole thing. Because, like, I'm just thinking about sort of, historically speaking, boys were the only ones that were valued because they were the ones that carried on the family line. So Barrayar feels backward enough in a lot of ways to really cleave to that. Anyway, we then find out about like the technology for reproduction and how it has advanced here. Cordelia had always assumed when her turn came, she'd have her kid cooked in a replicator bank at the start of a survey mission to be ready and waiting for her arms upon her return. And that is such a wild thing, like thinking that you're going to have your kid in such a impersonal way, and then being put in this position where you're having like a regular natural childbirth. What a complete shift in your plans. Like, I feel like I would be so flipped out, honestly. And we find out like you need to get a license to reproduce and that it costs money. So people have to scrape for it. Errol was going to be a superb co-parent. She was certain. If he ever touched down again from his new high place, surely the first rush must be over soon. I believe that he would intend to be a good co-parent. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be as present as she expects. And we find out, too, that she's actually really interested in the fact that Barrayar doesn't have the restrictions that Beta Colony did. So she could, like, if possible, they could have as many kids as Vorkosigan could afford. And she has never had the freedom to think of having a family that size. And there is a part of her that is really into the idea, which is surprising. I think that I haven't stopped to consider that she doesn't really have any personal goals or interests that I have seen beyond what she was doing with the military, with like geology, essentially. If it was geology and what was going on? It's geology again, though. But that was what she was working on, right? With investigating this new planet at the beginning of the first book. So, yeah, I guess I sort of expected her to just like have other things that she was like into and wanting to do. And when I looked at it, I was like, I guess not really, huh? Not to say that she would entirely give up being in the field if she had a chance, but they're not going to employ her in that way here. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. And she could have a daughter, not just one, but two sisters. Cordelia had never had a sister. Captain Vorpatrol's wife had two. And Alice Vorpatrol, too, was pregnant. Lord Vorpatrol had sort of stuck them together and ducked out. Naturally, they talked shop. Their shops being their uteruses. And Cordelia is like, listening to Lady Vorpatrol is like, I think I must have it pretty good because I am feeling okay. Not getting the sort of symptoms that she is getting. And of course, some of the horror stories. Oh, God. Barrayar's primitive medicine. True, moms had popped kids for hundreds of thousands of years, pre-space flight, with less help than what was available here. Yet, the niggling worry gnawed still. Maybe I ought to go home for the birth. And she eventually is just like, no, this is where I live now, this is it. But, yeah, that is scary. To just, like, know that you're in a place where they just don't seem to have access to the kind of things you're used to. There's no way that doesn't concern you, you know? Anyway, that is the end of chapter 3. It was time to go in. The sun was giving her a slight headache. I am so wildly over time, but what can you do? Jesus Christ. An extra half hour. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Appreciate you all very much. Hope you're enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.